much the same way as it was during previous administrations, and President Trump has said that it's going to be a lot different this time around. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo saying that on the Sunday morning programs as well yesterday. The president is under a lot of pressure, not only from inside the administration, but from a lot of Democrats in the Senate who sent him a letter to make sure that he gets a commitment from Kim to take some tangible steps toward denuclearization during this summit, or all future summits should be off. We do not know exactly what the president is going to say to Kim at this point. He's playing his cards fairly close to his vest, so we will see, Neil. It'll be interesting to find out.
John Roberts, thank you very much. My friend John Roberts in Hanoi. Now to those Chinese trade talks that were enough to propel the Shanghai market index 6% or so. It's officially back in a bull market right now. Blake Berman of the White House with the latest. Obviously, they're optimistic. We seem optimistic. Do we have reason to be?
Optimism is the word when you hear from both the Chinese side of things, Neil, and from the White House, President Trump, his team as well. The latest talks actually wrapped up earlier today. That was among the deputy-level negotiators. That followed 4 days of consecutive talks here in Washington among the senior-level members from both the U.S. and China trade teams. And afterwards, Chinese state media had a fairly positive light on the discussions. This was the statement from state media earlier today saying, quote, the Chinese delegation said that substantial progress was made on such specific issues as technology transfer, protection of intellectual property rights, non-tariff barriers, service industry, agriculture, and exchange rates. Now, as for President Trump, he feels as if this is moving in the right direction as well. Yesterday, he ended the upcoming Friday deadline to get a deal done. That would have meant tariff levels on $200 billion worth in products, as they were set to increase from 10 to 25% without a deal in place. But that increase is on hold for now. And within the past hour here, President Trump has tweeted the following. He said the following, quote, China trade deal and more in advanced stages. Relationship between our two countries is very strong. I have therefore agreed to delay U.S. tariff hikes. Let's see what happens. He questions there as he ends the tweet. This morning over here at the White House, the president also suggested that a signing ceremony could potentially happen at some point down the line. Listen here.
I told you how well we did with our trade talks in China, and it looks like they'll be coming back quickly again, and we're going to have another summit. We're going to have a signing summit, which is even better. So hopefully we can get that completed, but we're getting very, very close.
So, Neil, lots of talk about progress, but there are still many hurdles here to overcome, including the snapback provisions, meaning if a deal potentially in place, if that's broken, what are the penalties for breaking that, along with how that trade deal would be enforced. Enforcement mechanism is the term that we hear thrown around often. And then as far as it relates to the deadline, of course, the president took the Friday deadline off the table, but it still remains unclear whether or not there is or is not a new deadline, and if there is, what that deadline might be. Neil?
And the talks are that if there is promise of signing a deal, it would be in Mar-a-Lago here in the United States, though, one way or the other, right?
Mar-a-Lago with President Trump, with President Xi. That's what the president said in a tweet as well over the weekend. The talk is potentially doing this at the end of next month, though the Chinese have also thrown out the possibility of talks wrapping up at some time by May 1st. That would be some 60 days or so. Maybe a summit at Mar-a-Lago in a few weeks. The timing here still appears to be pretty fluid.
All right, Blake Berman, thank you very much. Let's go to Peter Brooks of the Heritage Foundation on this, ahead of going to my buddy Charles Payne on the economic impact of all of this. Peter, this notion of the North Korean talks, first off, the president has said progress is already being made in the lack, or actually no, missile tests on the part of the North Koreans now for upwards of 10 months. But is that enough? What else is the president going to need?
Yeah, we don't want tests of nuclear weapons. We don't want tests of missiles. You know, there's been a reduction in tensions on the peninsula, so I think the president can take credit for that. I think we have to keep our expectations modest for this summit. This is a very difficult problem set, an intractable foreign policy problem that's been going on for 70 years. So I think the president, this is an important meeting. I would like to see some sort of progress on something like roadmaps, or maybe working groups set up to deal with these issues. If we get more than that without giving too much away, I'd be happy with that as well. As John Roberts mentioned, the president is keeping his cards pretty close to his chest on this issue. But I think there are positive things that come out of this, including relationship building, which the president feels is key to his foreign policy in dealing with Kim Jong-un.
All right. Now, obviously, it's not by accident that they're meeting in Hanoi in Vietnam. Yep. Of course, the closeness is a crucial issue to the North Korean leader, who I guess can't travel very far. So the president's making the 9 or 10-hour trip. But Vietnam has become an economic juggernaut in that region. And there's also very, very favorable views that Vietnamese citizens have of the United States. The whole Vietnam War issue notwithstanding from decades ago. Does he hope magic strikes twice here?
I hope so. I mean, it's certainly a possibility. I mean, it's a little bit different than Singapore, which is also an amazing economic story as well, but maybe too far, a bridge too far for North Korea to get to in the short term, especially since you see in Vietnam, it's still not politically free. But it has shown a tremendous amount of economic development, as you mentioned. So maybe this is something that North Korea feels like it can embrace. Maybe it can't embrace China or Singapore, but maybe Vietnam. And considering the history with the United States, this could be very symbolic.
Peter Brooks, thank you very much, my friend. Always good catching up. All right, let's head to what happened in the quarter wall abroad today. The Dow wall of 60 points. We had been up north of 200. But the fact of the matter is, few people saw this coming when we were in the throes of a major sell-off that dipped us close to bear market territory around Christmas time last year. There was an exception to that. My buddy Charles Payne, who was looking at that in the throes of all of that to say, this is way overdone. And he put his money where his mouth was and said it then. We caught it on tape. I tried to find out if he really said it. Unfortunately, he did. And he joins us right now. Charles, good to see you.
Thanks a lot, Neil.
You know, it's interesting because since that time, to your prescience, we have seen the Dow storm back 16, 17%. The market averages are performing the best they've performed in decades. What's going on?
First, I got to say, the parallels from Christmas Eve, when the market was down 600 points in half a day, and Black Monday back in October 1987 were amazing, even down to mistakes made by Treasury secretaries. Back then, you had Baker, who had made some really scary comments to Wall Street, and then this time,
Germany
and Mnuchin calling up bankers on a Sunday 2 days before Christmas to see if everything's okay.
That's right.
So it's like we had a lot of parallels, and essentially that was the worst single session in the history of the market. And it turned out to be a launching pad for the stock market.
But what did you see then that a lot of people were not seeing that? I mean, that was overdone, or that the backdrop, the fundamentals of earnings?
The fundamentals more than anything else. The fundamentals. It's all, we play this persistent game of guessing. Right. We always guess, where's the top? Where's recession? Today, that was a big topic, right? So the guessing game juxtaposed against what really is happening. When what really was happening is we've got an economy that's doing extraordinarily well. Back then, we still could have had a 4% GDP number a 3% GDP number for the fourth quarter. That December retail jobs number took that down, but everything was firing in a way that certainly there's no way we would have turned on a dime and gone into a recession. Stocks were extraordinarily cheap. I mean, extraordinarily cheap by almost every metric. Huh?
When we went through the worst.
Yeah, when we were going through the worst in December.
Are they as cheap?
Well, they're not as cheap. They're somewhere between the 5-year average and the 10-year average with valuations.
But so is there much oxygen for this?
There really is a lot more room in my mind on the upside. And one other thing, Neil, you know, on December 24th, on the New York and NASDAQ, there were 1,100 stocks at 52-week lows. A week later, about a week or 6 days later, only 5. Wow. That was oversold territory. That's one of the most simple things people can check on every single day. It was absolutely remarkable. It was just oversold. It was just panic. That was the kind of panic that a lot of times you look for. They call capitulation, and we had it on Christmas Eve.
Yeah, you're right about that. Let me get your sense of how important this trade deal with China would be. That, you know, buy on the rumors, sell on the fact. Right. What do you think?
I wouldn't be surprised. I've been asking my guests that for the last 2 weeks because this rally has been so remarkable. 9 weeks in a row. The first time I think the first 8 weeks were up since 1964 to start a year. So a lot of this is built in. People really are coming around to believing we're going to get a deal. So even if we do get a little bit of a bump after that, you're going to look around. You know, not many firms thought we'd be this high at the end of the year. Right. Something dramatic has got to happen. We've got to either have a dramatic pullback or Wall Street's going to have to go sharpen their pencils and say, okay, you know what? It won't be 8%. It might be 14% or 20%.
But Wall Street has been wrong, right? And now these prognosticators are out saying within the next 3 years is going to be a recession. Well, that's an open-ended thing.
I want to put it on record now that within the next 3 years, there's going to be a massive snowstorm in the Northeast that knocks down 4 states for 3 days.
In that, right? 3 years.
I know. And here's the thing. June June, this same group said we were going to have a recession that began this year, in the fourth quarter of this year, over 50% of them. So they went back and kind of, but that's a different kind of game, a different kind of guessing game. Right now, all things are firing on all cylinders pretty well.
Technology seems back, capital goods, all of those type of things. Obviously, all the issues that could benefit from a trade deal with China, the Boeings, the Caterpillars, even the Intels, they seem to be responding well, right?
They are, but you know what's interesting? Technology, it's been the names that were hammered. So the semiconductors are doing well. Industrials are the best performing stocks out there. Financials had a good session today. Right now, about 475 of 500, the S&P 500 stocks are up.
Wow.
At our peak last year, we had more losers than winners, masked by those big names with those big coattails. This is a much more organic, widespread rally, so it feels better.
All right, Charles Payne, the host of Making Money, and he does help you make money. He goes against the grain here, and it tends to richly reward his viewers. All right, this might be a little rich. One of the world's richest men said, you know what, the rich should pay more in taxes. So we had a suggestion for this age. We'll just write a check, pay more. My next guest says then you can write a check out to the government. A former CKE restaurant CEO, Andy Puzder. He's not the first, and Warren Buffett is a brilliant investor. I take nothing away from him, but this clarion call on the part of the very, very wealthy who say, you know, we should pay more taxes. Now, it's not just the mega wealthy. A lot of millionaires in New York, a lot of high-income individuals who've been advocating paying more in taxes as well. And there is a push, certainly among Democrats, to make sure they do. What do you think's going on here, Andy?
Hey, look, if they want to pay more in taxes, they absolutely should just go and pay more in taxes. You can do that. As a matter of fact, last year, I found out during the confirmation process for Secretary of Labor that I had underpaid some payroll taxes. So I paid them, and the government sent the money back. So I contributed at the end of the year. I contributed an amount equal to what they sent back to me because I owed the tax. If you feel like you want to pay more, like you owe more, pay more. Stop contributing to these foundations that just transfer your funds, out of your estate prior to your death so that they can employ your children for decades. Give that money to the government. Let's pay down the deficit. Go for it.
I'm more concerned about the fact that it's tilted. Our tax system is tilted to the point where 43% in this country pay no federal income tax at all. I take nothing away from them paying Social Security, FICA-related taxes,
right,
and what have you. But all I know, when I was in grad school, it was a fraction of that number. So something accelerated here. And I'm not saying everybody has to pay a super high rate like someone rich like you. But that I think if everyone has some skin in the game, it doesn't have to be a lot of skin in the game, they're going to be more interested in how much we're spending on the game.
I think that's absolutely right. And you could end up in a situation like you have in California. I think it's about 150,000 people pay a very, very high percentage of the entire income tax for the state. So if those people start to leave or there's some kind of recession that impacts their income, it could have a very devastating effect on the state's economy.
Well,
and tax rates are driving them out.
They're out better than $2 billion because a lot of folks have up and left for better tax environments and sunnier skies, such as Florida.
So the higher percentage of the total tax revenue that those people pay as you drive them out of the state, the worse your state becomes. So it's a real problem. We have a very, very progressive tax system. Other countries with very high tax rates, for example, Denmark is a country that the progressives often use, really have more of a much flatter tax system. They don't overtax the wealthy. They tax all classes. And I'm not a big advocate for taxing the bottom half of people, but I think the upper half of the economic structure is being taxed, and I think at a pretty fair rate right now.
Well,
so
they say not fair enough.
What the problem is.
You've seen the Cortezes and some of the others who say the top rate should be significantly higher than it is now. I think she puts it, 70% if you get to over 10 million or what have you. But there are others who are advocating a wealth tax on the assets that you have, with the understanding being that the wealthy should pay more. Where do you think this is going?
Well, I hope it's not going to the point where we're actually punishing people for being successful, because people like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and Warren Buffett have had tremendous benefits for everybody in the economy, not just for themselves, but for everybody.
Bill Gates is among those who want to pay more.
Yeah, but the problem is Bill Gates made his money.
Right.
I don't want the next Bill Gates to feel like he's going to be restricted in how much he could or should do, that there's a stopping point before he gets to the point where he's really providing the kind of benefits somebody like a Gates or a Jobs can provide for the economy. I think it's a big mistake. I think we don't want to punish people who are wealthy. We want to try and be like people that are wealthy. That's how you generate economic growth and prosperity. We don't need the kind of want and need you have in countries like Venezuela because of a tax system that oppresses wealthy people. It's the wrong attitude. It's the wrong way to look at it. We need economic growth. Economic growth benefits everybody.
All right. Now, there was a time when we had much higher top rates, 70%, 90% for a while, when John F. Kennedy, sadly after his death, was able to get his tax cuts enacted by Lyndon Johnson to bring it down. But there were much higher rates. The country was fine. I always show distinction here that the tax base had about 92% of Americans paying federal income taxes, though.
Well, the problem with those high rates was nobody paid them. I mean, you can hire people to prepare your taxes where you don't have to pay those exorbitant amounts, and then wealthy people actually can control how much income they have. Their income doesn't come from a paycheck necessarily every month. They can control what kind of money they take in capital gains or whether a company pays dividends. So you're discouraging wealth creation, and again, that's bad for the economy.
Talked about a whole host of things. One, of course, being whether or not we would see any kind of military action in terms of the United States' effort to see Maduro move aside. And he kept reiterating that all options are on the table without being specific as to what that is. He did, however, say that he'd like to see more in the way of sanctions, which they did put in place today, additional sanctions on 4 individuals, 4 governors that work closely with Maduro. And he did as well say that he wants to see as much as possible an international effort to really get rid of this guy that has done so much harm to his people and so much harm to his economy in Venezuela, including, of course, over the weekend, Neil, preventing people from getting access to very much needed food and medicine. I know you spoke with Christina Vidal. I actually spoke with her as this all unfolded publicly for the very first time about a month ago, as well as all of the sons and daughters of all 5 American hostages, as well as the green card holder who was the CEO of Citgo. And I sat down with all of them. They're very, very worried, and they really are making a plea to anyone who will listen and anyone who can help their fathers. Most recently, another one of the daughters came on my program on Friday, Neil, and she played a voicemail from her father in which he suggested that she needed to get the word out because things could go south effectively pretty soon, and he was very worried. So she obviously, like all of them, Christina and the rest of them are very, very concerned. So I asked the vice president, what are we doing about our 5 American hostages? And here's what he said.
We demand justice for any American that is incarcerated anywhere in the world. And President Trump sent a very clear message a week ago that the Maduro regime should understand that any violence against Americans in Venezuela, any violence against President Guaido or his family or other opposition leaders, any violence against people that are simply standing in the streets to peacefully protest for freedom will not be tolerated by the United States of America and our allies.
So this is a message that the Vice President is making very clear. The United States will not stand for any harm coming to American citizens there that are being held prisoner right now in Caracas, and will continue as a country, he said, putting so much pressure on this regime, increasingly making it so difficult for them to function that ideally Nicolas Maduro will take a deal. and take amnesty and go live far, far away from anyone in Venezuela. Neil, back to you.
We shall see. Trish Regan, thank you very much. Look forward to the full interview, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Fox Business Network. Trish Regan sitting down with the Vice President of the United States in Bogota today.
And don't get me wrong, I've worked overseas, and I've seen the State Department operate, and I think they're incredible at what they do, but we have to draw the line. For them now to tell a domestic law enforcement agency how to do their job and the tools and resources they need to accomplish that, they're way out of their lane, and it's inappropriate.
All right, now some were officials in the Bush senior administration, what have you, but by and large, it was very prominent in Democratic names. James Clapper, the former Director of National Intelligence, former CIA Director John Brennan, National Security Advisor John Donilon, and on, Samantha Power, Thomas Pickering, Susan Rice. So I don't know if it's loaded for political bear, but having said that, their sense is that we're creating a crisis and maybe making more of one. What do you think of that?
Again, that's the same argument that you see the Democratic Party making in Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. And it's the same one why I broke my silence and I've been resisting. That's just not accurate. They're just not looking at the statistics. It wasn't that long ago when the president had 67 sheriffs from across this country in the White House. And what were they saying? They're the domestic law enforcement body representing this country, and they're saying it's a crisis and it's impacting every city in this country. That's who we should be listening to, in addition to the experts, the Border Patrol agents on the line working this. They say it's a crisis, and we know it's a crisis.
You know, Mark, the only thing that gives even some Republicans pause is the fact, be careful what you wish for. Even those who said the president's right to say we've got a crisis at the border. He got a little bit of funding, not all that he wanted, to build more fencing on the border. He got a little bit more commitment and maybe some wiggle room, you know, getting funds from one area or the other, even though Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi plan to fight him on that. But to declare an emergency is something that a Democratic president could take advantage of with you know, a Republican Congress, and they wouldn't like that.
I think that's right, and not to be kind of, you know, dismissive in my response. To me, that's a political issue. But from a law enforcement, border security perspective, I got to tell you, I'm applauding the president because Congress has failed this country to secure the borders. This last bill that they passed, and it was passed by the president, that bill was a failure. I really feel on the law enforcement, border security aspect, I feel the president had no choice to do this, to secure our borders and protect this country. It's what's needed. And I'm glad that the president is not kicking the can down the road, and he's saying it stops with me right here.
I've been doing this for 30 years. I know what I'm doing.
I don't think that working on an issue for 30 years alone is what qualifies, is what makes someone qualified to solve an issue.
Wow, I think that's a slap. Democratic Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez hitting back at Senator Dianne Feinstein and others she labels climate delayers after the senator told a group of children there's no way really to pay for the Green New Deal that's been proposed. Joining me now, Republican strategist Holly Turner, Democratic strategist Antoine Seawright. Holly, all she was saying, Dianne Feinstein here, is kids, you know, this isn't doable the way it stands now. She's not anti-climate change. She's just anti this approach to dealing with it, right?
Right. I mean, it was the most rational moment that a Democrat has had all year. I'm so glad that it was captured on film. But, I mean, that poor little kid who said, you know, we spend tons of money on the military. Why can't we just spend that here? I mean, this is horrible what the Democrats did in this situation. They tried to entrap one of their own to try and bully her into voting for something that's going to fail on the Senate floor. She is right. The senator's right. There is no way that we can afford this. I mean, in the past 300 years, we've spent $18 trillion on military in this country. The Green New Deal is going to cost us $100 trillion. I mean, it is just not affordable.
Antoine, do you think that this is about a bigger issue among Democrats, about who speaks for the heart and soul of the party here, those who embrace this green agenda that the Congresswoman does with Senator Markey of Massachusetts, but haven't looked under the hood to see that there's very little there or ways about paying for that?
I think this is another lesson. This is what I call growing pains, and this is what we are experiencing in the Democratic Party. But my advice to AOC is to take a lesson from Jay-Z when he says nobody wins when the family feuds. And so her going out bashing Senator Feinstein is probably not good for the long-term health of our party. Legislation always evolves over time. Just because something starts out some way doesn't mean it has to end up that way. So instead of her working with the senator, working with her colleagues to come to a more realistic, pragmatic approach, she goes out and bashes them on camera for likes on social media, and that doesn't get us anywhere as a party, and it definitely doesn't get us anywhere as a country in solving this issue, because this issue cuts across party lines, and so I'm somewhat disappointed.
All right. You know, Holly, Republicans, as you pointed out, too, haven't been the best fiscal stewards. You didn't say that, but of course, with the spending on that they've had, they've done little to sort of rein it in. So both parties are to blame for, you know, a lot of pie-in-the-sky goals without finding a way to pay for it or offer anything approaching fiscal sanity. Are you worried about that? And what these kids are brought up in a world, they see that and say, well, go ahead and just pay for it the way you usually do without paying for it.
Yeah, it absolutely is concerning. And I think it also brings up something that's really important. And, you know, we laugh about the Green New Deal and it's, you know, pie in the sky. But what it really is, it's not about climate change at all. I mean, the experts have said that even if the U.S. reduced its carbon emissions by 100%, it would have a negligible effect on the global temperature. So we know this is not about climate change.
So you're denying climate change?
No, I'm saying it would have a negligible effect on the climate. What I am saying is that this is about the massive redistribution of wealth. And Ocasio-Cortez has said it herself, this is a social justice bill. And so I think we need to be talking about the real issues here, and that is the socialist agenda that the Democratic Party has turned to. And that's what this is about. This is not about the climate.
Are you worried about just the fact that the party is getting concerned with what the Congresswoman is saying, that she might be leading them down crazy town?
Environmental injustice is a problem in this country. Absolutely. I'm glad the Democrats are the ones who want to blow the horn on the issue.
That she is not helping that cause?
No. I think what she's not doing is she's not helping our long-term goals as a party. And what I will say is the right-wing media has made her the media darling, so that sometimes comes off as a distraction. But this is a prime example in which...
Well, it's not the right-wing media that's bashing her now, right? Now
No. What I'm saying is every time she tweets or every time she does anything, it is an issue. It's mainstream for the right-wing media, and this is a prime example in which
it's mainstream
some of her.
For everyone. She speaks to the passionate party, right? Don't put it on the right-wing media. That's silly.
Cavuto, this is a prime
Mr.
example. This is a prime example of someone in her own party calling her out, saying, "Wait a minute, slow down."
That's right.
This is not the approach to take it.
All right.
So she does not speak for the Democratic Party, to be clear, regardless of what the right wing says.
She is the new Democrat Party.
We'll see. We'll see what happens, guys. It is entertaining. All right. I appreciate both of you. In the meantime, the IRS is saying that, you know, average refunds are smaller. First of all, it's way too early to tell officially one way or the other, but why is that a bad thing after this? All right, someone find me an accountant, because right now everyone's making a big deal of the fact that the average tax refund Americans are getting is down close to 17%. That could change, and it's volatile, but I'm thinking to myself, and I'm not an accountant, is that such a bad idea? In other words, you're getting more of that money during the course of the year than at the end of the year or whatever. Positive Financial Karma is a book. Daniel Geltrud, a crackerjack accountant in his own right, has put this together in a way that just makes sense to morons like me, and stepping back at the big picture. So, Dan, I'm looking at that. I'm hearing what you're saying in your book, that we got to get the big picture right. The big picture on this thing, even though you don't address that here, and though you do address Cortez, by the way, is this notion that it's bad if refunds are smaller. I could turn around and say, well, that means you were getting more money during the course of the year without giving the government an interest-free loan.
That's exactly what I think is going on, Neil. And look, in an ideal world, if you really plan your taxes properly, when you file your tax return, it's a net zero. No interest-free loan to the government. You don't owe anything. You don't get anything back. That's exactly how it's supposed to be. Now, this big deal everybody's making, Neil, about, wait a minute, refunds are going down. This tax law was designed to give people bigger paychecks.
But you live in New Jersey, as do I.
Yes.
And of course, in this area, for people who have to limit their, mortgage and taxes, it's going to cost them more. They're not doing it well, and they're finding that out. And you know this as an accountant just now, So they're listening to you and saying, oh, I don't like this.
Yeah, and well, look, the tax code picks winners and losers, Neil, and based upon that SALT deduction from high tax states, which you and I live in, I think we're going to be losers, you and I. And I don't like using that term with you, Neil.
But your point is, well, that for those of us, this is tipped to the rich and all, the reality is not really. You know?
No, it's not. It really isn't, because when you're in a high tax state, what you have in your state withholding and then real estate taxes, we're #1 in the nation, Neil, New Jersey, for real estate taxes.
Oh, you're right.
We're going to have a sting. And then you've also lost a whole bunch of itemized deductions on top of that. So this is not about the rich walking away.
You wrote this book to cover the higher taxes you're going to have to pay. Right?
I need the supplemental income.
You get into Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I guess around the time she was just elected, it toppled Crowley to become this giant she is. You said that the new Democratic nominee's economic policies are the polar opposite of mine, and I would guess of many Americans. Among her proposals, one really caught my attention: universal job guarantees. Many others since then. Then the issue how to pay for it.
Right. Well, where do we get the money from? Tax the rich. That's the answer to everything. But you know what we're seeing? That doesn't work. It doesn't work on a federal level, Neil. It doesn't work on a state level. Look at what just happened in New York. You had Andrew Cuomo going in to see President Trump because this SALT deduction issue is a major one. What's happening? Wealth is relocating. Wealth is mobile, and they will go to where they're going to lessen their tax burden, even if it's an inconvenience. Yeah. They're going to do it.
Your message is what? You just got to use common sense, save what you can, when you can, be on top of that, no matter the age, better, younger. But it's common sense stuff, and it will bite you if you don't do it.
Yeah, and it's only a matter of time, Neil, that, they say the best time to plant a tree, 20 years ago, second best time today. So it's never too late to start doing the right thing financially. It's all about intent, Neil.
I definitely want to get you on the Business Network to go into this in more detail. Positive financial karma. Daniel Guthrie, he knows of what he speaks, and he speaks English. Not bad for an accountant. We'll have much more after this on all of that. Can you force the issue?
Well, it really depends on a federal judge. I mean, what would happen is that the House Intelligence Committee would serve a subpoena on the Attorney General and ask for a copy of the report. The Attorney General would send them a redacted version, and then they would enforce the subpoena by going before a federal judge. The federal judge will read the report in secret, decide whether the redactions were appropriate. Some redactions are required by law. Right. The Attorney General cannot, under the law, without exposing himself to criminal liability, reveal statements made to a grand jury that did not result in an indictment. There are certain classified materials, secret, top secret, and confidential, that Bob Mueller, and Attorney General Barr cannot reveal without a court order. So Congressman Schiff may want everything. I think he'll get the majority of what he wants, but he can't get what he wants that the law prohibits him from getting. He wants to run, in my view, a parallel investigation of Bob Mueller, whereby he and the Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee can reveal what tidbits they want and keep back what tidbits they don't want to reveal.
Now, when the Mueller probe comes out, and let's say it doesn't really have anything to stick to the president, that doesn't mean anything for Schiff, right? He could pursue whatever he wants.
Correct. He could call the same witnesses and look at the same evidence that Bob Mueller did and come to an entirely different decision, except Bob Mueller has the authority to indict. Congressman Schiff does not.
All right, so if Bob Mueller says there's nothing that we can see that is untoward or illegal here on the part of the President of the United States, but Schiff could take that same report or finding and do what?
Release excerpts to attempt to embarrass the president, or...
I guess what I meant, could he make impeachable offenses out of that?
Yes, he can attempt to do so. I think Mrs. Pelosi has on her hands a lot of people that want to impeach the president, no matter what.
No matter what. Not in the Mueller, anything that would rise to high crimes.
Precisely, because they believe that their base wants that. Look, the Democrats in the House can get their hands on President Trump's tax returns and go to the floor of the House and reveal them.
How can they do
just to embarrass him? There's a statute. Honestly, I didn't know the statute existed until our colleague Gary Schreier said, is this true? We checked the statute. The chairman of the Senate Finance Committee and the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee can get anybody's tax returns that they want. They can then go to the floor of the Senate, the floor of the House, and reveal it with impunity. Why would they do that? To taunt and torment and embarrass the president, and for no valid governmental purpose.
Michael Cohen, real quickly, on Wednesday in the public testimony. What do you expect from that?
Fireworks, but all of it pre-presidential behavior.
Incredible. All right, my friend, thank you. I'm sorry for the truncated time, but amazing stuff. We're on top of all of that. A final look at the corner wall and broad. The Dow up about 60 points today. It had been up higher, but you know, it's only with about 2.5% of all-time highs. That's the highest level this year. The 5 is now.
Envoy to North Korea, Stephen Biegun, has been willing to offer North Korea too much in terms of incentives to begin taking apart its nuclear program. U.S. officials are very concerned that denuclearization has now become a negotiating point, and they point out that Kim promised to do it last June, and now he seems to be backing away from that commitment. One of the big issues to tackle here, of course, is sequencing. There have been some positive moves to build trust and confidence, but North Korea is now taking a position of, well, if you do this, then we'll do that, which is very much the same way as it was during previous administrations. And President Trump has said that it's going to be a lot different this time around. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo saying that on the Sunday morning programs as well yesterday. The president is under a lot of pressure, not only from inside the administration, but from a lot of Democrats in the Senate who sent him a letter to make sure that he gets a commitment from Kim to take some tangible steps toward denuclearization during this summit, or all future summits should be off. We do not know exactly what the president is going to say to Kim at this point. He's playing his cards fairly close to his vest, so we will see, Neil. It'll be interesting to find out.
John Roberts, thank you very much. My friend John Roberts in Hanoi. Now to those Chinese trade talks that were enough to propel the Shanghai market index 6% or so. It's officially back in a bull market right now. Blake Berman of the White House with the latest. Obviously, they're optimistic. We seem optimistic. Do we have reason to be?
Optimism is the word when you hear from both the Chinese side of things, Neil, and from the White House, President Trump, his team as well. The latest talks actually wrapped up earlier today. That was among the deputy-level negotiators. That followed 4 days of consecutive talks here in Washington among the senior-level members from both the U.S. and China trade teams. And afterwards, Chinese state media had a fairly positive light on the discussions. This was the statement from state media earlier today saying, quote, the Chinese delegation said that substantial progress was made on such specific issues as technology transfer, protection of intellectual property rights, non-tariff barriers, service industry, agriculture, and exchange rates. Now, as for President Trump, he feels as if this is moving in the right direction as well. Yesterday, he ended the upcoming Friday deadline to get a deal done. That would have meant tariff levels on $200 billion worth in products, as they were set to increase from 10 to 25% without a deal in place. But that increase is on hold for now. And within the past hour here, President Trump has tweeted the following. He said the following, quote, China trade deal and more in advanced stages. Relationship between our two countries is very strong. I have therefore agreed to delay U.S. tariff hikes. Let's see what happens. He questions there as he ends the tweet. This morning over here at the White House, the president also suggested that a signing ceremony could potentially happen at some point down the line. Listen here.
I told you how well we did with our trade talks in China, and it looks like they'll be coming back quickly again, and we're going to have another summit. We're going to have a signing summit, which is even better. So hopefully we can get that completed, but we're getting very, very close.
So, Neil, lots of talk about progress, but there are still many hurdles here to overcome, including the snapback provisions, meaning if a deal potentially in place, if that's broken, what are the penalties for breaking that, along with how that trade deal would be enforced. Enforcement mechanism is the term that we hear thrown around often. And then as far as it relates to the deadline, of course, the president took the Friday deadline off the table, but it still remains unclear whether or not there is or is not a new deadline, and if there is, what that deadline might be. Neil?
And the talks are that if there is promise of signing a deal, it would be in Mar-a-Lago here in the United States, though, one way or the other, right?
Mar-a-Lago with President Trump, with President Xi. That's what the president said in a tweet as well over the weekend. The talk is potentially doing this at the end of next month, though the Chinese have also thrown out the possibility of talks wrapping up at some time by May 1st. That would be some 60 days or so. Maybe a summit at Mar-a-Lago in a few weeks. The timing here still appears to be pretty fluid.
All right, Blake Berman, thank you very much. Let's go to Peter Brooks of the Heritage Foundation on this, ahead of going to my buddy Charles Payne on the economic impact of all of this. Peter, this notion of the North Korean talks, first off, The president has said progress is already being made in the lack, or actually no, missile tests on the part of the North Koreans now for upwards of 10 months. But is that enough? What else is the president going to need?
Yeah, we don't want tests of nuclear weapons. We don't want tests of missiles. You know, there's been a reduction in tensions on the peninsula, so I think the president can take credit for that. I think we have to keep our expectations modest for this summit. This is a very difficult problem set, an intractable foreign policy problem that's been going on for 70 years. So I think the president, this is an important meeting. I would like to see some sort of progress on something like roadmaps, or maybe working groups set up to deal with these issues. If we get more than that without giving too much away, I'd be happy with that as well. As John Roberts mentioned, the president is keeping his cards pretty close to his chest on this issue. But I think there are positive things that come out of this, including relationship building, which the president feels is key to his foreign policy in dealing with Kim Jong-un.
All right. Now, obviously, it's not by accident that they're meeting in Hanoi in Vietnam. Yep. Of course, the closeness is a crucial issue to the North Korean leader, who I guess can't travel very far. So the president's making the 9 or 10-hour trip. But Vietnam has become an economic juggernaut in that region. And there's also very, very favorable views that Vietnamese citizens have of the United States, the whole Vietnam War issue notwithstanding from decades ago. Does he hope magic strikes twice here?
I hope so. I mean, it's certainly a possibility. I mean, it's a little bit different than Singapore, which is also an amazing economic story as well, but maybe too far, a bridge too far for North Korea to get to in the short term, especially since you see in Vietnam, it's still not politically free. But it has shown a tremendous amount of economic development, as you mentioned. So maybe this is something that